In this video, we will talk about an alternative kind of space and time and construct an alternative type of cosmology. This reality, as we have talked about in this series of videos, is word and meaning rather than object and property. We have also alluded to this reality as a person a few times. We will combine these two descriptions in this video and talk about how word meaning becomes person and persona. The word is the I, and the meaning of the I is varied personas of that I. The world is expanded from an I when the I decides to know itself as varied kinds of personas. Then the persona of the I becomes the meaning of I in answer to the question, what am I? The I is the who, and the what is the persona. Since this persona changes, therefore, there is a when of the what as well. Once the who, what, and when are known, then this persona is expressed as the how, where, and why, and a world is created. This process of creation can be simply summarized as the process of a person getting to know themselves. Everyone is trying to ultimately know themselves through all their actions. For example, an artist creates a painting by externalizing his ideas into a work of art. After that painting is complete, the artist looks at the painting as his creation, his child, or a part of his persona. If that painting is beautiful, then the painter knows himself as something beautiful. If the painting is valued, then the painter is valued. In this way, every act is an act of a person trying to find their true self, which they hope will be valued. If the work is valued, then the self is valued. If the work is devalued, then the self is also devalued. Thus, all work is the process of the discovery of that self which will be valued. The process of self discovery can be compared to a person looking at themselves in a mirror. In case of introspection, the person and the mirror are the same. But for our discussion, we will keep them distinct to avoid confusion. The question is, why does a person look into the mirror? The answer is, he wants to know how he looks. Does he look good? Does he have any flaws? Is the suit he is wearing nice? Is his hair well combed? Which side looks the best? Which side looks the worst? I'm not trying to be prescriptive here, but you get the basic idea. Different people may emphasize different things while looking into a mirror, but the basic reason is that they want to know how they look. The same process applies to a person introspecting on themselves. What am I? Am I good? Which side of me is better than others? He looks at himself from many angles and finds various kinds of personas within himself. He likes some persona more than others. This is the basic process of creation in the Vedic texts. There is an original person or I. He is called the Purusha. He has a counterpart called the Shakti. The Purusha is the person and the Shakti is the mirror. Since the Purusha is reflected in the mirror, therefore, the Purusha is both inside and outside the mirror. Since the reflection of the Purusha in the mirror is cognized by the Purusha subsequently, therefore the mirror is both inside and outside the Purusha. Since everything seems paradoxical with this description, therefore the example of a person looking into the mirror is helpful to understand the inside versus outside descriptions. The process of self-discovery can be depicted by the graphic shown here. There is an I, which we can call the knower. This I has many personas that are like many sides of the I. The I tries to know these various personas one after another. That sequence of knowing the I as different personas is time. It is the sequence constructed by choice. Therefore, we can say that time is just the sequence of choices. To know himself, the I divides into a knower and known. The knower is the person outside the mirror, and the known is the reflection in the mirror in which the person is reflected. The mirror is the space that expands like an inverted tree. This is because the person outside the mirror is a word, and the mirror elaborates on the meaning of the word. For example, the word can be truth, right, and good. But what is the meaning of truth, right, and good? The answer is that there are infinite meanings because there are infinite types of truth, justice, and beauty. So the person outside the mirror looks into the mirror, and the mirror creates a vision of the truth, right, and good. This is how the person outside the mirror realizes the meaning of what he is. He knows that he is the truth, right, and good. But what does that really mean? The mirror gives the answer. Thus, from a single eye, we initially get three eyes. These are compared to the father, mother, and child in Vedic personalistic philosophy. The first eye is called the Purusha. He is the person outside the mirror, the father of the creation. The second eye is called the Shakti. She is the mother from whom the creation springs. The third eye is called the Jīva. It is the child born from the mother, also commonly called the soul. In Abrahamic religions, there is just a father and a child. There is no mother. But in Vedic texts, there is father, mother, and child. The whole creation is thus just one family, produced from one father and one mother. The father and mother are the same self, and yet they have become the knower and the knowing. The child is also the same self, but as a partial picture of the knower. Thus, at a deep level of thinking, there is oneness in Vedic thinking, in the sense that the father divided himself into father, mother, and child. These then became a family, so they are united as a family even after they are separated. If the child wants to separate itself from the father and the mother, then it is the child's delusion. Since Abrahamic religions say that there is no mother and the child is separate from the father, therefore they are by definition an illusion. Many followers of Abrahamic faiths who have come to distinctly appreciate the Vedic system see some similarity between Abrahamic monotheism and the Vedic system because there is an original Purusha which looks like the monotheistic God. But there are three major differences between the Vedic system and the Abrahamic monotheism. First, there is a mother who is not only an equal standing as the father, but also a distinct personality in terms of her gender. Second, the child or the soul, also called the Jīva, is born from the mother and not just from the father. Third, the father, mother, and child are just three aspects of the same reality rather than separated objects as in monotheism. Now is a good time to talk about three aspects which we have discussed many times earlier. As we have said a few times before, the same thing is space, dimension, and object. This three aspect thinking applies to the beginning of worldly creation as well. The Purusha is the dimension, the Shakti is space, and the Jīva is the object. The Purusha is the thinker, the Shakti is the power of thinking, and the Jīva is the thought. We cannot equate the thinker to the power of thinking to the thought because sometimes the thinker doesn't think. In that case, the power of thinking is not used and the thought is not perceived. But it doesn't mean that the power of thinking has ceased to exist or that the thought doesn't exist. Both the power of thinking and the thought are simply hidden inside the thinker. Thus, creation is the apparent separation of the thinker, thinking, and thought. Destruction is thought and thinking merging into the thinker. It is worth remembering that the thinker is thinking about himself, so when he sees a reflection in a mirror, the reflection is also a person. However, since the reflection is only one persona of the person, therefore the reflection is also a partial person compared to the person being reflected in the mirror. The partial person cannot think as much as the original thinker, and yet even the partial person is a thinker. Therefore, after the thought has been created by a reflection, the thought becomes a thinker with its own power of thinking hidden within it, along with its hidden thoughts. As the thought comes alive, the power of thinking and the thought separate, and a second order thinker thinking thought is created. Even in this second order thought is yet another thinker thinking thought. In this way, the universe expands endlessly from an original thinker thinking thought to infinite other thinkers thinking thoughts. We can now understand the meaning of curved space and time. Time is curved because it is a cycle. It is a cycle because it is created by the Purusha turning the mirror to see his different sides. The Purusha initially sees the left side, then the right side, then the frontal face, and then the behind. Within each of these sides, there are partial portions to look at. For example, in the frontal image, the Purusha can see eyes, nose, ears, or the mouth. Then he can see hands, then the belly, and then the legs. In this way, time is also hierarchical because the Purusha shifts the attention from the front to the back, from the left to the right sides. Then within each of these images, the Purusha focuses on the different parts. Within each of those parts are several other parts. Since there are a finite number of parts to see, therefore eventually the attention of the Purusha comes back to the original face, part, subpart, and so on. A cycle of vision is nested within other cycles because there are a finite number of faces, parts, and subparts to see. The consciousness of the Purusha goes from one part to another. Similarly, space is hierarchical because each thought becomes a thinker thinking thought, which then expands into more thinkers thinking thoughts. Each thought is therefore a space because the thought is a thinker. That thought is a time because it can be thinking, and it is an object because it was originally a thought. In this way, thinker thinking thought is space, time, and object. The hierarchy is created because we can elaborate a thought into many thoughts. Quite like a book title is the summary of many chapters, each chapter title is the summary of many section titles, each section title is the summary of many paragraphs, and so on. The hierarchy of the universe is just like the hierarchy of book title, chapter title, and section title within a book. One thing is at once many things. We have to always keep semantics in mind. The book title is a meaning, the chapter titles are other meanings, and section titles are yet other meanings. If we keep the meaning at the center, then the tripartite model becomes very easy. Similarly, if we keep person thinking at the center, then how the same thing is thinker thinking thought becomes very easy. Finally, if we keep word meaning model at the center, then person and persona become word and meaning. Each person is a word, and the personas of that person are the meanings of what it means to be that person. Each person is many personas that are like the faces of a person looking into a mirror. By alternatively turning, the person sees his many faces, one after another, and thus knows himself completely. Many people who have cursorily studied Vedic texts tend to be surprised by the idea of reality as word meaning. They think of matter as substances and thus equate everything in the Vedic system to substances, quite like Greeks had substances such as earth, water, fire, and ether. This is not true for two reasons. First, a substance is impersonal, but even material reality is personified in the Vedic text. Second, there is no mind body divide in the Vedic text, such that the body is studied in the same way as the senses, mind, and the intellect. Since the senses, mind, and the intellect are different kinds of meanings, therefore, even the body is yet another kind of meaning. The bodily meaning is called smell, taste, sight, touch, and sound. The senses perceive these sensations. The mind combines these sensations into object concepts such as table and chair. The intellect then judges if this combination is true, right, and good. In this way, even the body is meaning. Similarly, all the parts of the body, senses, mind, and intellect, can be expressed in words. Why should all experience be describable in language? Certainly, it is not describable in mathematics. That is because our experience has a one-to-one correspondence with ordinary language, but not with mathematics. Every experience we have is a certain kind of meaning. Corresponding to that meaning is a reality, which is a word. The word objectively has many meanings, which we can experience one after another. Therefore, the whole reality becomes word meaning. The self or the I is also a word, and when it experiences itself, or when another I experiences some I, then they can accurately describe each I in words. And by this correspondence, even the self or the I becomes word meaning. Thus, there is no foundation for a substance or object property thinking in the Vedic system. Equating Vedic thinking to object property thinking is nothing but sheer ignorance. The word meaning reality is called Śabda-Brahman in Vedic texts. Shabda means a word and Brahman means a person. Each word is a person and each person is a word with many meanings, one of which is the ideal meaning and the others are possible meanings, quite like we can call a pen by the name pen and its ideal use is that of a pen, but there are other non-ideal uses of the pen as well. Even tables and chairs are words and persons. Rivers, mountains, lands, and trees are personalized in the Vedic system. Therefore, everything is a person. There are no objects or substances. Whatever seems like an object or substance is the result of the fact that their capacity to exhibit their personhood has been diminished. As we have discussed earlier, the senses, mind, and intellect are abilities, and the body is disability. The body of the stone is the disability to exhibit the capacities of the senses, mind, and the intellect. This is true even of humans. A human mind can go into the past or future, but the body cannot. The human mind can go to any place in a moment, but the body cannot. The human mind can think of another mind or just like the other mind, but the body cannot become another body. The senses, mind, and intellect are abilities which are disabled by the body to varying extents. The body is not the senses, mind, and intellect because the body disables the ability of the senses, mind, and intellect. The senses, mind, and intellect are also the disabilities of the I because the self has many more abilities than the senses, mind, and intellect, which means that even the senses, mind, and intellect are disabling the self to different extents. The abilities of the self are the ideal meaning of the self, but the abilities of the senses, mind, and the intellect are the non ideal meanings of the self. Therefore, just as a pen is an imperfect toy, weapon, doorstop, and paperweight, similarly, the senses, mind, and the intellect are an imperfect version of the self. To the extent that the senses, mind, and intellect hinder the self, they are called a body, although a different kind of body than what we normally consider a body. All these are bodies of the self or the I. Therefore, when we talk about reality, we are talking about different persons or I's. These I's give themselves various kinds of meanings, including judgments, thoughts, perceptions, and a body. The judgments, thoughts, perceptions, and the body are the meanings, while the I is the word. The combination of I with perception, thought, judgment, and body is called a word meaning complex. Hence, when we study reality as meaning, then we are studying the body, perceptions, thoughts, and judgments. When we study the reality as words, then we are studying each individual I. When we combine the I with its acquired meanings, then we are talking about a word meaning reality. This is quite different from a substance reality or an object property reality. As we have discussed earlier, the I has three aspects called Sat, Chit, and Anand. Due to Sat, we say I am father, I am mother, I am son, I am daughter, I am owner, I am citizen, and many other such things. By each of these things, the I defines itself in relation to other I's. Similarly, due to Chit, we say I am tall, I am short, I am black, I am white, I am young, I am old, and many other such things. By each of these things, the I defines itself as different types of intellect, mind, senses, and bodies. Finally, due to Ananda, we say, I am happy, I am sad, I am afraid, I am bored, I am ambitious, I am angry, I am depressed, and many other such things. By each of these things, the I defines itself as a different kind of emotional experience. Thus, I is just one thing. We can say that I is the noun. But this I also has many adjectives and verbs which are divided into three categories as we have just discussed. We can also say that the I is the word and the adjectives and verbs of I are the meanings. This is how we get the Śabda-Brahman philosophy, in which word meaning is a person with many qualities. The person is the I and the noun and the word, but all its qualities are the verbs and the adjectives of the I, which are meanings of the word. Therefore, when we study reality as word meaning, we are studying reality as persons. The person with adjectives and verbs is identical to word meaning. We can do more science with word meaning thinking, and we can do more religion with person and their adjectives and verbs thinking. When the same thing is both word meaning and person adjective verb, then the same study is both science and religion. The demarcation between religion and science ceases to exist. Thus, I is the most basic and fundamental word. This I word tries to find its meaning and then becomes numerous other words. Since I could expand into many words, therefore the subsequent words can also expand into many other words in the process of finding their meaning. In this way, the world expands like an inverted tree whose root is the I, which then expands into many words, each of which then expands into many more words. We have discussed this inverted tree while talking about Sankhya. We have now arrived at the same inverted tree in a different way. This background of word meaning now allows us to construct an alternative science based on word meaning rather than objects. Modern science studies the trajectory of objects, but in the Vedic system, we study the trajectories of words, giving themselves many meanings. In both sciences, there are trajectories, but in modern science, the trajectory is the motion of objects, while in the Vedic science, the trajectory is the successive meanings of a word and successive bodies, senses, minds, and intellects of the self. Therefore, life, self realization, meaning, and purpose are divorced from modern science because modern science conceives reality as objects. But if we talk about word meaning, then nothing is divorced from science, and we can still talk about life as a trajectory. The alternative study of trajectories is the alternative definition of science that we can call Vedic science. It is not about the trajectories of objects, it is about the trajectories of persons. The tripartite description of a person as Sat, Chit, and Anand can be further elaborated into six-part description. In this description, the Anand aspect of the person is divided into three parts, namely will, emotion, and intention. The Chit aspect of the person is divided into cognition and conation. Finally, the Sat aspect is not subdivided and just remains the capacity to have relationships. Thus, the three parts are subdivided to create six parts, in which Anand is divided into three parts, Chit is divided into two parts, and Sat is divided in just one part. To illustrate this with an example, consider an ordinary word such as an apple. The word has some meaning such as some shape, size, color, taste, and smell, which is how we cognitively understand an apple. But something is an apple only if we can eat it. Eating is the conative meaning of the apple. Then the apple is not an apple for a lion, it is an apple for humans. Therefore, appleness is defined in relationship to humans, but not in relationship to lions. The apple also feels happy and sad. Scientists have conducted experiments on plants and shown that they too have emotions. Similarly, the apple exists for the purpose of being eaten, and that is its intention. Finally, each apple is unique in its cognition, conation, relation, emotion, and intention. This uniqueness of the five traits is what makes the apple a person. An object has common properties. A person always has unique properties. Therefore, the word meaning ontology is identical to a person with cognition, conation, relation, emotion, and intention. A word is a person, and a person is a word. When we use the word I to talk about the self, the word is not well defined. We then define the I in five ways. Similarly, when we speak about the word, its meaning and reference is not immediately known. But the word is not devoid of meaning and reference. The meaning and reference can change with time, place, situation, but there is an objective meaning and reference. Hence, we can talk about the same thing as word meaning and person with five properties. At a high level, we just talk about word meaning, but at a more detailed level, we talk about the six aspects or phases of one thing. This is then the philosophy of Śabda-Brahman, namely that words are persons and persons are words. The complexity in a word is as much as that in a person. A word is not simple. It looks simple if we don't know its varied meanings. If we reduce one word to just one meaning, as Aristotle did, then we get Gödel's incompleteness, as we have discussed in previous videos. The basic relationship between the six aspects is described in many Indian traditions as the elephant and the five blind men problem. The elephant is the whole word or person, but there are five kinds of meanings or parts of the word person. If we know just one of the five meanings, then we are like blind men who can see only one part. To see all the parts, we have to be visionary. Quantum mechanics is an example of the blind man problem. The same thing is particle from one perspective and a wave from another perspective. The same thing is many different particles from different perspectives. These are like the trunk and the tail of the elephant. The elephant is both tail and trunk, but the tail and the trunk are not the elephant. Therefore, one who knows the elephant can reconcile the verdicts of the blind men, but the blind men cannot reconcile each other's verdicts. They keep arguing with each other because they are not seeing the whole thing. Thus, the five blind men and the elephant problem becomes a general paradigm for all philosophy, religion, and science. Progress in philosophy, religion, and science depends on being able to reconcile all the varied opinions. But only one opinion, namely that of the whole elephant, is the best opinion among all. Other opinions are not entirely false, nor are they the complete truth. The Satchitanand philosophy can also be formulated using a different triad called contextual, universal, and individual. The Ananda aspect is the individual, the Chit aspect is the meaning universals, and the Sat aspect is the relationship between the combinations of Anand and Chit, namely words with meaning. They constitute the references. For examples, we sometimes use the word apple to refer to something. In this case, we are referring to a specific individual thing, not the general class of things called apples. Similarly, at other times when we use the word apple, we mean a class of things. Thus, the same word sometimes means a class of things, and at other times it means an individual thing. The class of things is defined by its adjectives and verbs. For example, the class called car can be identified by its adjectives and verbs. A car's adjectives include its chassis, steering, wheels, and engine. But none of these adjectives are necessary. An electric car may not have a combustion engine. A self-driven car may not have a steering. A car may have fewer or greater number of wheels. Therefore, what we call a car is primarily driven by its shape and size. Changes to that shape and size make us call it a truck or a bus. However, even as something looks like a car, it may not work as a car. It may have something that looks like an engine, wheel, or steering, but they may not work as expected. Therefore, we determine if the parts of the car do their respective functions and the car as a whole does what it is expected to do. Since the parts of the car may not be present, hence the functions done by those parts may also be absent. And yet the car as a whole must work. Thereby, we define a class such as a car in two ways. A, it looks like a car, and B, it works like a car. Looking like a car is the car's adjectives, and working like a car is the car's verbs. If some part of the car becomes dysfunctional and stops working, we don't immediately say that it is not a car. We try to repair or replace the dysfunctional part, and it again becomes a car. The relational aspect of persons becomes a grammar in a language. That is yet another detailed topic that we will not try to cover here, but it is worth noting it in the passing. A grammar is nothing but how different words are joined together into a sentence. That sentence can be treated as a word and then joined into a paragraph. Thus, the whole of reality is joined by a grammar of relationships. Nothing is a free particle, a thing in itself, a self-contained individual. All these ideas that are the foundations of Western thinking are outright rejected in Vedic thinking. The definition of a class as verbs and adjectives is generalized in Vaisheshika as Dravya, Guna, and Kriya. The noun car is the Dravya, the adjectives of the car are the Guna, and the verbs of the car are the Kriya. Something is an ideal car when all three are present. If something is missing, then it doesn't immediately become not a car. It is mostly a car, except for a minor missing part. Now we can talk about how a space is constructed from language. There is an original I which has all the possible verbs and adjectives. This original I is called Krishna. He is a person and he is a word. The word Krishna means all attractive, and the person Krishna is all attractive. That is because he has all the adjectives and verbs. If you are short, then you will be attracted to tall. If you are weak, then you will be attracted to strong. If you are complex, then you will be attracted to the simple. But if you are simple, then you will be attracted to the complex. Hence, Krishna means all attractive because all possible adjectives and verbs are also the adjectives and verbs of Krishna. Thus, the origin of all reality is just one person, Krishna, with all his adjectives and verbs. But these adjectives and verbs can also be separated from Krishna to produce many nouns that are defined by a smaller set of adjectives and verbs. For example, while Krishna is both the biggest and the smallest, other things are either big or small. While Krishna is the strongest and the weakest, other persons are either strong or weak. In this way, Krishna is the root of an inverted tree space. He is the origin of the space that is the fullness of all verbs and adjectives. But from this root emanate many trunks, branches, twigs, and leaves that are fewer adjectives and verbs. Each adjective and verb contains many adjectives and verbs. For example, color is an adjective, but so is yellow and lemon yellow. Color is a simple adjective, but it is also more encompassing. Yellow is a more complex adjective, but also more restrictive. Lemon yellow is even more complex and even more restrictive adjective. Hence, color is a trunk of an inverted tree. That trunk then divides into three branches such as yellow, blue, and red. Then the branch called yellow divides into twigs called lemon yellow, chrome yellow, beige yellow, and so on. In this way, as we go farther from the root, we get more complex adjectives and verbs, which are also more restrictive verbs and adjectives. The simple is encompassing and the complex is restrictive. Similarly, there are various kinds of nouns that have more or less adjectives and verbs. For example, a human is a noun with some adjectives and verbs, but birds and trees are different nouns with different adjectives and verbs. While a man can fly like a bird using an airplane, the bird cannot compose music and poetry like a man. Therefore, man is a noun with more adjectives and verbs compared to a bird. By this process, we construct a hierarchy of nouns that have more and more adjectives and verbs. The higher level noun has more adjectives and verbs, while the lower level noun has fewer adjectives and verbs. In this way, we get a three-dimensional space from nouns, adjectives, and verbs. As we rise to upper levels of this hierarchy, we get Krishna, who is the complete noun, in the sense that he has all the possible adjectives and verbs. Everything else below Krishna has fewer adjectives and verbs and is hence an incomplete truth. Thus, from the philosophy of Śabda-Brahman, first we get an idea about language as Shabda. Then, from the same philosophy, we get an idea of personhood. And finally, from the same philosophy, we get a space. The space is a world, universe, or reality. It is constructed from a language. It comprises higher or lower level persons, and it is a space or world we can see. Since the world comprises words, therefore we can say it is semantic reality. Since the word is also a person, therefore we can say that this reality is a person. Since the reality is space, therefore we can do a scientific study of language and persons. Thus, the trialism between language, person, and world is dissolved. The same thing is a world, a language, and a person. Normally, most people think that reality is objects, the observer is a person, and the language is in between the person and reality. Thereby, we get three worlds of reality, person, and language. In Greek philosophy, language was called the Platonic world, the person was called the mental world, and reality was called the material world. As we have discussed in earlier videos, these were the three separate worlds. But in the philosophy of Śabda-Brahman, this trialism is resolved because everything is a person, a language, and reality. This reconciliation of language, person, and reality is the philosophy of Śabda-Brahman. We have in earlier videos spoken about three worlds without talking about Śabda-Brahman. We have now summarized it as Śabda-Brahman. The three aspects of the self or I, namely Sat, Chit, and Anand, combine to produce an experience. For example, if there is an apple in front of you, then Sat is the relation to the apple, our minds and senses are the Chit, and our desire to see the apple is the cause of using the senses to see the apple. If one of these three is removed, then we cannot see. The apple must exist in front of us, but our senses may be looking at something else. The senses may try to look at the apple, but there may be a wall in between the eyes and the apple. Finally, we may be capable of seeing but have no desire to see, and therefore we will not see anything. Thus, the three aspects of the self have to combine to produce an experience. This leads us to the theory of four spaces, in which three spaces are related to the self, and the fourth space is experience produced from the combination of the three spaces. We can also call these seven spaces, such that there are six spaces pertaining to the self, and the seventh space is the combination of the previous six spaces. Since 7 is more complex than 4, therefore we will just talk about the 4 spaces. The first such space is the Chit space, which creates cognitive distance. The cognition is a complex process that comprises the objects being known, the senses that perceive it, the mind that conceives it, and the intellect that judges it. But for simplicity, we will just talk about a Chit space or cognitive space and disregard the hierarchical structure within the space. In the cognitive space, there are distances that depict the similarity and dissimilarity between various things, sensations, thoughts, and judgments. For example, birds are more similar to birds than to humans. Humans are more similar to humans than to animals. Due to this similarity within a class of things, humans mostly live with humans, birds mostly live with birds, and animals mostly live with animals of their species. This is not a universal truth, but it is a common truth. The universal truth is obtained by combining the three spaces, but a prominent effect is obtained by just the Chit space. Within humans, birds, and animals, there are families, herds, and groups that have relationships with each other. In a human society, a herd is called a family. Previously, families used to be large and there were many relationships. But at present, all the relationships have been reduced to a handful. That's why we don't realize that humans are just like herd animals. We have started thinking that humans are individualistic because this individualism has been inculcated systematically in modern societies. Even then, humans cannot live without relationships. They must have friends, husbands, wives, children, parents, grandparents, and so on. Those within the herd are close, and those outside the herd are far. That is also not a universal truth, but it is created because we naturally come close to those with whom we have a relationship. Our sense of duty, responsibility, commitment, and care are confined to those within the herd and generally not to those outside of it. Finally, within the herd too, we have strong emotional bonds with some members of the herd than others. For example, even if a person lives in a large family, his attachments are stronger toward a few people, slightly weaker toward others, and weakest towards the rest. Similarly, the emotional bond is generally weaker to individuals outside the herd and weakest towards those outside the species. By this emotional bonding or attachment, even within a herd, a person comes closer to some members and spends most of their time with them. Those who have a strong emotional bond keep thinking about them even if the bodies are far apart. Thus, they get mental proximity even if the bodily proximity is absent. Otherwise, there is both bodily and mental proximity. In this way, one simple way to understand three kinds of causes of proximity is to think of how humans are closer to humans than to animals. Then some humans are closer because they are part of a family, society, organization, or herd that brings them together into a relationship. Finally, even within the herd, society, family, or organization, there are people closest to each other than to anyone else in the family, organization, society, or herd. Then what to speak of members of other species? However, the simple way to understand three kinds of causes of proximity is not the universal truth. Factually, one may be closer to a dog or a cat than to a human. Factually, one may have no family of humans and therefore form a family with a cat and a dog. In this case, the cognitive proximity doesn't exist, but there is relational and emotional proximity. Likewise, two people may have an emotional attachment to each other, but that attachment may not be convertible into a formal relationship because they belong to different ages or races or societies or cultures or different financial strata. The emotional bond exists, but it doesn't become a relational bond because the cognitive difference is very high. Therefore, the only general statement we can make is that three kinds of causes interact to produce a proximity. If all three are consistent, then the proximity is also good. If something is inconsistent with the others, then the stronger type of inconsistency creates a conflict, and whichever of the emotional, relational, or cognitive side wins either creates a distance or proximity. We call this the observed distance or proximity, the phenomena or the appearance. It is created as a result of the three fundamental types of distances and proximities. In an earlier video, we talked about a boy studying a book because he has nothing better to do, or because he is curious about a subject, or because he believes his future depends on it. If all three are satisfied, then the focus on studying is very strong. If one of them is weak, then the focus is also weak. Thus, there are three kinds of realities and one effect of that reality. That effect is the observed distance, and the three realities are the causes of the effect. Hence, we can talk about distance in four ways. One of these ways is the effect, and the other three are causes. The causes are real, and the effect is the appearance. Based on these four observed factors, we can talk about the four spaces. In each space, there is a different kind of distance or proximity, but by their combination, a perceived proximity is created. This type of four space is different from another four space we discussed earlier. It was called Vaikari, Madhyama, Pashyanti, and Para. If you recall, then we talked about the four steps of counting, namely distinguishing, identifying, sequencing, and labeling. That four space was about the different ways of distinguishing, identifying, sequencing, and labeling. The present four space is different from the previous four space. The previous four space exists within each of the present four spaces. For example, even in the phenomena space, we use distinguishing, identifying, sequencing, and labeling. Similarly, we have to follow the same four steps in the relational, cognitive, and emotional spaces. Therefore, there are two different kinds of four spaces. Since we can embed one space into another, such as when we embed a human society within many species and then a human family within a society. Similarly, we can embed both kinds of four spaces within each other. To keep things simple and not confuse it too much, we will restrict ourselves to just the four space we have talked about here, and note that it is different from the four space noted previously. The present four space is called Shakti, Prakriti, Maya, and Jagat in Vedic texts. Maya is the emotional cause or Anand, Prakriti is the cognitive cause or the Chit, and Shakti is the relational cause or Sat. Finally, by the combination of Shakti, Prakriti, and Maya, a visible world called Jagat is created. This Jagat or visible world is not reality, it is just phenomena. The reality is Shakti, Prakriti, and Maya, but we cannot perceive them in isolation. They are always perceived in the combined state. Shakti, Prakriti, Maya, and Jagat have the fourfold distinction of Vaikhari, Madhyama, Pashyanti, and Para. It means that we should be able to distinguish Shakti, Prakriti, Maya, and Jagat from each other, then identify each one of them, then sequence them, and finally label them as 1, 2, 3, and 4. In Western thinking, reality is just one thing, but in Vedic philosophy, reality is three things, and by their combination, a fourth thing called phenomena is produced. Therefore, neither is reality one thing, nor is phenomena equal to reality. Rather, reality is three things called Shakti, Prakriti, and Maya, and by their combination, a fourth thing called Jagat or phenomena is produced. Once we understand this fourfold distinction between spaces, then everything becomes very easy in Vedic cosmology. Because once reality is known, then the phenomena can be known as the constant or changing combination of the three facets of reality. For example, if the universe is created, then it is due to some combination of the three spaces. If the universe is destroyed, then it is due to the separation of three spaces. Then if the universe is expanding, then it is due to an increase in the combination of the three spaces. If the universe is contracting, then it is due to a decrease in the combination of the three spaces. If some parts of the universe are rotating, it is due to a changing combination of the three spaces. If some parts of the universe are static, then it is due to constancy in the combination of the three spaces. Thus, if the three spaces are known, then creation, destruction, expansion, contraction, rotation, and constancy can be understood very easily. The basic unit of space in Vedic cosmology is called a graha. It is loosely translated as a planet, but the literal translation of a graha is a house. We live in a house and we live on a planet. Similarly, a graha or planet is also a word meaning complex. Every word has an ideal meaning, just like the ideal use of a pen is as a pen. However, just as a pen can also be used as a toy, weapon, paperweight, and doorstop, similarly, there are non-ideal meanings of a planet. Just like the structure of an atom, even a graha has a structure in which the core region is the ideal area and the surrounding periphery is non-ideal. This non-ideal region comprises the uninhabitable places on the earth, such as deep sea, high mountains, hot deserts, and so on. We can go there, but they are not ideal places to live. The ideally habitable places are those with moderate temperatures where there is abundant supply of water, sunlight, cultivable land, and so on. The uninhabitable places are just like the non-ideal uses of a pen as a weapon, toy, doorstop, or paperweight, while the habitable places are just like the pen. Finally, there are impossible meanings of a pen such as a car or bicycle. Similarly, there are impossible parts of a graha that we call other planets such as Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and other farther stars. They are not at all suitable for living for people born or growing on Earth. However, we have to remember that whatever we call the other planets and stars are also part of the Earth Graha, but they are not the real Graha called by the same names. They are just like the pictures of an apple in our minds that are different from the real apple. The picture of the apple exists, It is part of the person seeing the picture, and yet it is not the real apple outside the mind. We can also compare them to the things we see in a dream. The dream objectively exists within us. We are not the things that we see in the dream, and yet there are real things outside the dream as well. The fact that we see something in a dream neither means that it is reality, nor does it mean the absence of reality. It just means that what we see is not reality, and yet there is a reality. In an earlier video, we talked about the domains of presence and absence. We noted that each thing has to be defined in two ways, as what it is and what it is not, because nothing is just one thing. Since everything is many things, therefore saying that it is ideally one thing is not saying much, as it also can be put to a non-ideal use. Therefore, we have to note the non-ideal uses just as well the impossible uses. The pen that can be used as a weapon or toy is different from a pen that cannot be used as a weapon or toy. Therefore, by adding the non-ideal, we get a better idea of the whole thing than just talking about the ideal. Similarly, by noting the impossible, we get an even better idea of what something is, because the impossible has been eliminated. Therefore, non-ideal and impossible play a very constructive role in defining something. This is just like a word has one ideal meaning, many non-ideal possible meanings, and several impossible meanings. We have also discussed how there are more or less ideal, non-ideal, and impossible. The more or less ideal, non-ideal, and impossible applies to the graha as well. The more impossible area of a graha is that which will kill an earthly inhabitant quicker than a less impossible area. Although eventually everyone will die in the impossible area if they try to live in that place. In the less impossible places, they can survive longer, and in the farther regions, they will die quicker. Thus, distance from Earth is a measure of the impossibility of the survival of the life that is born and raised on Earth. The impossible area doesn't mean that life outside the Earth doesn't exist. It means that life born on the Earth cannot live in the impossible area of the Graha. But there are other Graha which also have ideal, non-ideal, and impossible areas. The impossible places we see within the Earth Graha are just telling us that there are millions of places to live other than the Earth. All the people born on the Earth cannot go to those places. It is similar to showing a toy model of Taj Mahal to indicate that such a thing really exists, although nobody can live inside the toy model of the Taj Mahal. What we see in astronomy includes the impossible areas of the Earth Graha. This is not cosmology. Astronomy is phenomena and cosmology is reality. Astronomy and cosmology are not identical in Vedic thinking, but they are identical subjects in modern science. If the distinction between reality and phenomena is unknown, then cosmology will be confused with astronomy, and that becomes a flawed way to study cosmology. At the end of the video on the origins of special and general relativity, we talked about how the two biggest outstanding problems in modern cosmology are the accelerating expansion of the universe and faster than expected rotation of galaxies. These problems become trivially easy in Vedic cosmology because the visible reality is produced by the combination of three kinds of spaces. The universe genuinely expands when more portions of Maya, Prakriti, and Shakti combine. But the universe can appear to expand when different portions of Maya, Shakti, and Prakriti combine. By a different combination, light from the remote locations in the universe will appear to be redshifted. In this case, the universe hasn't factually expanded, only the combination of the three spaces have changed. but there can also be genuine expansion in which the total amount of visible reality grows because previously uncombined regions of the three spaces are now combining. Thus, there can be real expansion and apparent expansion. It is not obvious from modern cosmology if the expansion is real or apparent, but both are possible in Vedic cosmology. Similarly, the universe can undergo a real or apparent contraction. In a real contraction, the total number of planets will genuinely reduce. In an apparent contraction, the total number of planets will remain the same, although their nature will change, which can appear as blue shift. The universe in Vedic cosmology undergoes both real and apparent expansions and contractions during different times. Thus, the problem of dark energy in modern cosmology is solved by two factors. The first factor is that nothing is dark. Everything can be perceived by a suitable process. It may not be visible to the eyes, but eyes are only one of the five senses of perception. The effects can be perceived by touch or even as sound vibrations. The expansion of the universe was first detected by what is now called the cosmic background microwave. It is a type of sound. We don't know the meaning of the sound and hence it is called background noise. But it pervades the entire universe. That is because space is not uniform in all directions. Rather, each location in space is a different sound. When locations in space interact, sound appears to be transmitted from one place to another. This is actually not transfer of energy. It is just like two people informing each other about the presence of the other. By such information transfer, the universe becomes self-aware. The second factor in the explanation of dark matter is that the universe is not constant energy. Rather, energy exists in a potential form and becomes actual by the combination of three kinds of energies. When the combination increases, then the universe can factually expand, although no new energy is being created. It was simply potential energy that is becoming actual energy now. Similarly, when the combinations decrease, then the universe can factually contract, although no energy is being destroyed. It is just actual energy becoming potential energy. The process of expansion and contraction is driven by a choice to combine three spaces or separate them. This causality is not due to physical forces, nor is it material. It is just driven by a will or choice. The rotation of parts of the universe always represents a change, quite like the rotation of planets we see represents change. When something rotates, it reveals a different face to us. That revelation of a different face changes our relationship to that thing. The change in relationship then alters other behaviors. Therefore, when rotation goes fast, it means that the relationship is changing faster. When the rotation is slower, it means that the relationship is changing slower. These are not the effects of gravity or mass, they are the result of a different combination of the three spaces. These space combinations are the result of the movement of consciousness, which is controlled by will. It doesn't require extra mass. The problem of dark matter or dark energy, therefore, does not arise. The postulated excess amount of matter need not exist because change is not caused by mass or gravity. Change is just caused by the movement of will. Quite like a person can roll their eyes and see the world rolling, similarly, by the movement of consciousness, the world appears rotating when it is just focusing on different things, one after another. To give an example, we can imagine two people standing in front of each other. Each person can see the other person's face and not their backs. But the front and the back are just two faces of the same reality. They can be seen one after another by choice. If one person is able to see the other person's back, then he might say that the person has rotated. But what has actually rotated is the focus of consciousness. By the movement of consciousness from one phase to another, something will appear to be rotating even as it is not rotating. This is precisely how the rotation of planets is explained in Vedic cosmology. The planets are fixed cognitively speaking, but due to an emotional change, the relation to other things keeps changing. The planet is static in the cognitive space, but it is moving in the relational space. Hence, even the moving thing is called the same thing. For example, when the sun moves in the sky, its relation to different parts of the earth changes. That movement is just like the sun looking at one part of the earth after another. The movement of the sun is therefore the movement of consciousness rather than body movement. When the conscious focus changes, then the sun appears closer to the part where he is focusing presently and farther from the part that he is defocusing from. This is because distance is produced as a result of conscious focus. When the focus changes, the distance changes. Hence, the sun appears to move by changing its conscious focus, quite like a person may rotate their eyes and start seeing something and stop seeing the other things. It appears as motion of the sun to everyone. When we explain the cosmic phenomena as the result of conscious will, then we don't get the problems of dark matter and dark energy, nor do we need gravitational theory. The gravitational phenomena, such as the movement of the sun, are explained based on choice and will, and the faster movement of galaxies and expansion of the universe are explained in the same way. When the explanation of gravity, dark matter, and dark energy is the same, then there is no need to postulate the existence of dark energy and dark matter. All these things factually don't exist. But because gravity cannot explain these phenomena, therefore dark energy and dark matter are postulated. Even those postulates are unnecessary when the explanation is movement of consciousness. When astronauts travel in space, the emotional and cognitive part of the spaces remains almost totally unchanged. Even the relational space in the body remains unchanged. Only the relational space outside the body changes. Two effects result from this change. One, the astronaut feels weightless because weight is a relational effect of the earth on the astronaut's body, and when the relational distance changes, then the weightlessness is experienced. Two, the astronaut sees the region of the relational space outside the relational space of the earth. Being in the space doesn't prevent the astronaut from remembering the earth or his mind returning to earth. His intellectual, mental, and sensual capacities remain the same. He is just relationally outside the earth space. If we draw a person in terms of the six aspects, then five of the six aspects are unchanged. Within the sixth aspect, divided into the self, intellect, mind, senses, and body, four out of the five aspects are unchanged. Within the body, the internal relations within the body are also unchanged. Only some of the external relational aspects of the body toward other bodies are changed because the astronaut's spacesuit is still letting him eat, drink, breathe, and live like he was eating, drinking, breathing, and living on Earth. The astronaut has just moved into a non ideal region of experience vis a vis the sensations of sight and touch. Nobody can live in outer space forever, but by exerting their willpower and training, they can live like that for some time. Factually, the conditions of weightlessness and the vision of distant bodies can also be recreated on the Earth using a movie projector and an anti gravity chamber. Whatever can be experienced in the Earth is therefore still part of the Earth. It is just an uncommon and non ideal region of the Earth Graha. It is not the impossible condition. The impossible condition includes changes to the cognitive and emotional nature, the relational nature within the body, living outside the space suit, and so on. which is humongous, but it is never attained by the astronaut. Hence, according to the Vedic text, going into outer space or to the empty planets is not leaving the earth. It is still staying within the earth graha, although moving from the ideal to the non-ideal regions. People studying Vedic cosmology often talk about flat and round spaces. They see the flat descriptions of the earth, they find some references to round earth, and they want to avoid the conclusion that the earth is flat, because flat earth has the connotation of backwardness in some religions and cultures. They don't realize that the flat earth of these religions was a flat land, and the flat earth of the Vedic system is a semantic space in which flatness denotes similarity of meanings experienced by a person. By equating the flat earth of the Vedic system to the flat earth of other religions, and then feeling ashamed about it as a primitive way of thinking, they try to make the flat earth round. The study of Vedic cosmology is thus not free of other religious dogmas. It is present in the form of hating the past from another religion and applying that hatred to the study of the Vedic system. To get over these primitive flat versus round discussions, we have to recall the tripartite nature of concepts. Every concept is a space, a dimension, and an object. For example, from the perspective of green, color is a space. From the perspective of shape, color is a dimension. And from the perspective of sight, color is an object. We have discussed these at length earlier, so I will not delve into it now. We just have to remember that this is the nature of all concepts. Even the earth is a concept. Therefore, it has a tripartite nature. From the perspective of living entities in the earth, earth is a space, just like color is a space for green. From the perspective of other planets, earth is a dimension, just like color is a dimension from the perspective of shape. Finally, if we get out of the earth, then the earth is an object, just like color is an object from the perspective of sight. All the three views are true, although from different perspectives. This object, dimension, and space view has an object in it, but it is actually a person. From the outside, we see the person because each person is an individual. In comparison to other persons, each person looks like a different type of person. And within that person, there are many other persons that are its part or part persons. Therefore, by object, I do not mean the objectivity of modern science. I just mean an individual that looks like an object but is actually a person. The next thing we need to know is that color is one of the many adjectives of something. There are other adjectives like taste, touch, smell, and so on. Apart from these adjectives, there are many verbs. As we have discussed earlier in Vaisheshika, the nouns are called dravya, the adjectives are called guna, and the verbs are called kriya. The nouns form a class of things that includes subsets of adjectives and verbs. For example, we can take the classes called car, airplane, and rocket. These are nouns, but within each of these nouns, there are wide varieties of adjectives and verbs. These nouns can be layered one on top of the other. As we have earlier discussed, each of these nouns can also be divided into concentric regions of the most essential features to the less essential but more advanced features. For example, there is a bare bones car that has an engine, chassis, steering, and wheels, but it doesn't have an air conditioner, music system, and hands-free. We can talk about successively more complicated cars which have additional features. The advanced cars have been developed after adding bells and whistles to the basic car. The advanced car is also called a car just as much as a bare bones car. But due to the stratification of the car class, we can talk about many car segments as successive concentric circles of more and more expensive cars enjoyed by richer and richer people. This principle applies to the earth as well. The earth is a low level plane comparable to a car. in contrast to an airplane and rocket. The earth is the inner region of primitive life, comparable to a bare bones car in contrast to cars with an air conditioner, music system, and hands free. In both these cases, the earth is described as a flat plane. It is the most illustrative and comprehensive description of space, and hence it is the most preferred in the Vedic texts. However, a flat plane is not a physical plane. If a person stands in the center of this flat plane, he is standing in the region of the most primitive type of noun. The concentric regions outward from the center are progressively more advanced types of the noun. When an observer stands in one region of this space, his body acquires a quality that prevents him from seeing nouns from other parts of the space. We have to recall again that the body is simply gates that disable our perception. Standing in one place disables our perception differently than standing in other places. We can see things that are similar to our nature, but we cannot see things that are dissimilar to our nature. This is the basic effect of guna and kriya on perception, that we cannot see everything everywhere and we cannot do everything everywhere. There are specific places where we can see certain things and specific places where we can do certain things. In a physically flat plane, we can see as far as infinity, but in a space whose dimensions are guna and kriya, we cannot see very far. We can at most see things that are similar to our place. This creates the perception of roundness in which close things are seen and far things are not seen. However, if we move away from the present location, then we will be able to see a different set of things and will be able to do different kinds of things. Finally, if we keep going farther and farther, we come to a point where we reverse the direction because these directions are based on guna and kriya rather than physical distance. This is how a flat plane appears as a sphere to us. The flat plane is the conceptualization of space, while the round earth is the perception of the space. The flat plane is the reality, and the round sphere is the phenomena. As we have discussed time and time again, the reality and the phenomena are not the same. The genesis of all the problems in understanding Vedic cosmology is physical thinking. One such type of physical thinking is that space is uniform in all places. But as we have discussed, the space is also a person, and different parts of the space are like the body parts of a person. When we look at the head, then we cannot see the legs. When we look at the legs, we do not see the head. Similarly, when someone is situated in the leg region, the head region is not visible. But when someone is situated in the head region, then the leg region is not visible. This personalized conception of space is used in all traditional Indian architectures, where space is described as a Vastu Purusha or a thing person. It looks like a thing to everyone, and if someone equates it to a thing, then it becomes uniform space. But if we see it as a Vastu Purusha, then the same thing becomes a thing person, and it is no longer just a thing, it is also a person. Thus, even space is personalized in the Vedic system, and all locations in space are not uniform. Due to this, a space becomes a person. The same space has been depersonalized in modern science. Thereby, the whole cosmos is called Virat Purusha or a gigantic person in Vedic cosmology, but it is just called an empty space in modern science. The conception of the universe as a gigantic person cannot be equated to the conception of a universe as an empty box. In a flat space, everyone can see everything, but in a personalized space, everyone cannot see everything. The types of things they see are based on the guna and kriya of the place they are situated in. This means that every part of the universe does not affect every other part. After all, every part is not seeing the other part, so how can it affect the other parts? Some parts do affect other parts, while other parts don't.
Modern cosmology assumes that whatever we see is the whole reality. That is, of course, not true. We cannot see every part because all the parts don't have similarities of guna and kriya. From different parts of the universe, different other parts can be seen. However, in general, as we rise upward in the universe through the layers of higher and higher level nouns, more and more parts of the universe can be seen. As we descend the universe, fewer and fewer parts can be seen. Thereby, ascending in the universe is tantamount to a more complete vision of reality. Descending in the universe is equivalent to a more incomplete version of reality. All the visions are not equivalent. Due to the different visions of the universe from different parts, an alternative type of relativity is created in which all the visions are not the same. But that doesn't mean that all the visions are equivalent. The observer equivalence postulated in modern relativity is false, as we have discussed in the earlier video. When the principle of semantics is applied to space, then we can understand that all places are not the same. Relativity is true because everyone doesn't know everything. Relativity is false because someone knows more than the others. Finally, relativity is replaced by absolutism of a person who knows everything. Thus, modern relativity is contrary to absolutist knowledge, but the Vedic system of relativity allows for many perceptions without removing absolutism.
Time entered as a new ontological category in Western thinking with Newton's mechanics. Prior to that, and up until Descartes, time was just supposed to be an attribute of substances such as mind and matter. However, even after time was separated from mind and matter, it was just reduced to a dimension in geometry. Newtonian time is slightly different from Cartesian time in the sense that it is ontologically distinct from matter. But Newtonian time is just like Cartesian time in the sense that it is still res extensa. By reducing time to a dimension in geometry, physics destroyed all sophisticated ideas on time which each of us are intimately familiar with. For example, happy times pass quickly and sad times pass slowly. Busy times pass quickly and idle time passes slowly. Sleeping time seems not to pass at all, while waking times seem to pass. Physics removed all sophisticated ideas of time from discussion, and then it started getting into contradictions about different ideas of time being required to formulate different theories of physics. The contradictions of these ideas disprove the thesis that time is just a dimension of geometry. We will now turn to discussing the problems with this idea to reinstate the sophisticated ideas. In the video on the pursuit of a unified theory, we talked about three contradictory theories that have resisted unification because numerous dualisms such as continuous versus discrete, finite versus infinite, reversible versus irreversible, and so on. We did not discuss at the time that these theories have contradictory views on time. In quantum mechanics, time is discrete because what we mean by the passing of time is a quantum event. If no event occurs, then the clock cannot be said to move and time cannot be said to pass because time has been reduced to a clock and a clock moves when there is a quantum event, which is always discrete. When time is discretized because the clock can only move discretely, then we get a contradiction with calculus, where time has to be continuous. Similarly, in general relativity, time is reversible. We can invert the direction of time and the universe will then go back to its previous state. But time is irreversible in thermodynamics because all processes are irreversible. Hence, time cannot be inverted. However, time is still continuous. Thus, relativity and thermodynamics are contradictory because the former is reversible time and the latter is irreversible time. Quantum mechanics and relativity are contradictory because in the former, time is discrete and in the latter, time is continuous. Due to these two dualisms, we get three contradictory theories that cannot be reconciled. Accordingly, science has no way of finding a unified theory of time because of the conflicting ideas about time. There is an even deeper problem about space and time that is almost never discussed in science. This is the question of how the world is governed by mathematics. Even if we say that the world is governed by some mathematical equations, those equations have to be computed in some computer. Time is now simply the sequence of outputs of the computer. There is no meaning of time other than the outputs of the computer. But where is that computer? Writing down the equations on paper doesn't mean that the paper is governing the universe. There has to be a computer that computes these equations for the universe to work. But that computer is yet another material object which requires a separate space and time. For this computer to work, there must be yet another computer whose outputs are the sequence of events that constitute time for the computer. But that second computer needs a third space and time, which needs yet another computer, and so on ad infinitum. Essentially, for one universe to exist, there must be infinite spaces, times, and computers, each computing the laws for the next universe. The reason this problem is never discussed is due to Platonism. It is assumed that a non material transcendental reality exists to govern the material world. But if we were to allow one kind of transcendental reality, then what is the problem with other transcendent realities? We cannot have the double standard where science is allowed a transcendental realm while everyone else is denied that realm. But it is precisely due to this double standard, which is never discussed, that science pretends that it is purely materialistic. The fact is that science needs a miracle of mathematics. That miracle is not less miraculous than any other miracle in any other miraculous ideology. Science is also relying on one miracle to do everything else. The twin problems of three contradictory ideas and the use of the miracle of a self computing computer or an infinite cascade of computers can be solved by an alternative way of thinking about time in which time is nothing but the sequence of choices. When we go into deep sleep, then we don't make choices. Time doesn't pass for each individual then. Time begins to pass only when we wake up. Therefore, the idea of time cannot be separated from the idea of choice. This idea, however, reconciles the three contradictory ideas about time. Since time passes because of choices, and the choices can be slower or faster, therefore, time can dilate or contract. Everyone knows about this dilation and contraction because we go through anxious times and relaxed times. The relaxed time passes quicker, while the anxious time passes slowly. Of course, that is always in contrast to another observer who is relaxed while we are anxious, or anxious while we are relaxed. Similarly, since time passes because of choice, therefore time is discrete. Every moment a new choice is made, and each choice is discrete. However, even as the observer makes discrete choices, the observer doesn't disappear when the choice is not made. Simply being self aware without another choice is the experience of continuity. Finally, every choice has a consequence. We cannot make a choice and then simply reverse it. We have to bear the consequences of our choices. That consequence makes choice irreversible. It doesn't mean that time is never reversible. The past can come back after we have endured all the consequences of our choices. Therefore, time is both irreversible in the short run and reversible in the long run. Similarly, time is both continuous as the self awareness and discrete as the choices. This is how we reconcile irreversible with reversible and continuous with discrete. Even the problem of cascading spaces and times or computers doesn't arise because they are required for bootstrapping a universe, and the self with choice doesn't need bootstrapping. The logic by which a person makes a choice is not external to that person. That logic is internal. The logic is basically that everyone seeks to define and know themselves in one of the many possible ways that can be realized. That is choice, but not driven by an external force. Since a person goes through phase after phase, therefore the attempt to know oneself as one of the many possible phases is governed by internal causation. This also makes time cyclical because each time the I becomes a specific persona until all the personas are exhausted and one returns back to the initial persona. Just like the previous videos, we come to the same conclusion at the end. That conclusion is that all the problems of modern science are rooted in the depersonalization of reality. This depersonalization began in Western thinking with Greek philosophy when some upstart philosophers rejected the pagan systems of religion and started an impersonal way of thinking. Successive steps in Western thinking have taken this impersonalism to the next level. Initially, nature was impersonalized by calling it a substance. Then, society was impersonalized by creating a vision of society governed by laws rather than by persons. Finally, all persons were depersonalized as machines. Depersonalization begins by separating the various aspects of a person into a dualism, trialism, and so on. These separated aspects are initially put into a separate domain or world, as the Platonic world, the mental world, and the physical world. Then some side of the dualism or trialism is relegated into obscurity. For example, after the mind body divide, the mind was put into obscurity. Finally, after some time, the obscured world is said to not exist at all. For example, at today's time, people simply say that the mind is a byproduct of the body. In this way, separating a person into parts, then obscuring some parts, and then denying their very existence has become the method of Western thinking. Of course, it takes a long time to separate, obscure, and deny. Hence, a history of Western thinking is created in which there are phases of separation, followed by phases of obscuring, followed by the phases of denial. When we reach the end of this process, we are left with nothing but contradictions in our claims. And the contradictions are so many, then some people advocate nihilism or the absence of truth, right, and good. A nihilistic society drifts towards self destruction. After that self destruction, we get another opportunity to start all over again. That nihilism of Western thinking is now upon us. It is heading towards self destruction. We can start thinking about what comes after that. There is an alternative to this nihilism. It is perfect because it solves all the problems of nihilism, but we need courage to take to it.